Welcome in. We got another Check the Mic draft special. Kyle Krabs back with us, the lead NFL draft expert here at the 33rd team. Kyle, thanks for joining again.
Steve, it's good to see you. It's lots changed since the last time we got together. So looking forward to kind of working through what we feel like's changed throughout this draft class so far.
Well, let's hear it from the top. I mean, last time we focused a little bit on QBs. You have a new draft board out there. Let's start high level for those less familiar with the current draft class. How would you describe this draft class, and just touch on some strengths and weaknesses, and we'll kind of get into some of the more specifics and where you have some players ranked.
Yeah, I think it's a really compelling class there's a lot of high tools guys that maybe don't have complete resumes. And you were hoping for guys to make leaps this year, and I don't know that that's necessarily happened for a lot of guys. So you get through what I think is probably a definitive do to top 5, top 8, top 10. But outside of that initial group, you're really looking at a lot of guys that have production versus potential conversations or positional value conversations. I think there's a really strong group at the top, but you're talking about a safety and a running back or two of those probably top 5, 6 guys, just if you're authentically grading off the tape. And those guys have positional value questions too.
You have several cornerbacks in your top 10, including Travis Hunter. We talked about him last time. I was kind of going around the horn with a lot of draft analysts on how we would use Travis Hunter at the next level. With him being the number one player, do you anticipate any changes at the top between now and April, or is Travis Hunter pretty much locked in for you?
I'd be surprised if he ends up moving for some of the dynamics that we talked about last time, just because there's a certain floor of impact play that you're expecting based off what he's already put on display. And then there's an assumption that there will be more time on task spent on one of those roles, even if he ends up playing both at some point down the stretch. That's just going to really tap into the instinctual elements of his game that are really, really, really impressive.
Malaki Starks is at 5. By the way, the full draft board over at the 33rdteam.com. Be sure to check it out. I think a lot of people like Malaki Starks as a safety. I've got some questions about him as a pure safety. I was actually watching him and asking around, would you ever move him to corner? Because when he plays straight one-on-one with his size and movement skills, ball skills, outstanding. But he's at 5 on your board. You obviously like him. What do you see with Malaki Starks, and what do you think his best role is? Or is there a specific safety role that you love him in at the next level?
I'd love to see him land in a place that's willing to move him around a little bit and take advantage of some of those skills that you're talking about. The man coverage stuff, particularly when he gets down in the slot, is really, really good. I'm really drawn to what he does as a tackler. He's very reliable as a tackler. He's got big time striking ability. He's got some heavy pads to him as well. And the instincts that he plays with, I think it's fair to point out the authentic deep half or high post reps are where he's least impactful. And how do you find ways, especially if you're talking about drafting him in the top half of the first round, to kind of justify the kind of investment that you'd be talking about as far as being close to the ball. I think he has the versatility to fill all those different roles, and because of that, that's why he finds himself so far up the board. But I agree with you. I think you watch him play man coverage, particularly from the slot. I think he's got the makings of an awesome nickel. It's if you're in base defense, where do you want to line him up to get the most out of him there?
Yeah, it's fun. There were a few years ago that teams, when teams were looking for those Seattle cover 3 corners, they were Seattle and other teams would look for big, long safeties who were fast enough and say, he's actually an outside corner. And I just got those vibes with Starks with those nickel reps. I just wonder if other teams might have, if he runs fast enough, that type of thought process with Starks. A bunch of Georgia players, not surprising, but Jalon Walker at number 7, and you're calling him a defensive weapon. I looked up, his snap distribution over on PFF. 155 snaps in coverage, 155 snaps as a pass rusher. You don't normally get that. We're living in this world. By the way, I have a theory. Number 11. When number 11 rushes off the edge, it looks cooler. It looks better. Micah Parsons made it look cooler. I think that bumps up Jalon Walker and Abdul Carter. But what's his role at the next level as a pass rusher, linebacker hybrid?
Yeah, I think about the scheme that's all the rage right now, and it's the Mike McDonald scheme, and there's a lot of simulated pressures and non-traditional four, and he can be a part of the four that rushes if you line him up on the edge. He can be part of the four if you line him up as a stack player, but he can also not be a part of the four while lined up on the edge. There's a lot of ends that are dropping out and taking hook coverage in your zone looks when you're trying to manipulate protections and change where the passing strength is and what the numbers are to either side of the center. That I think he just gives me a little bit more confidence in what he does beyond rushing the passer as compared to Abdul Carter, who I have right behind him in the next spot. I think Abdul is a better pure pass rusher, which is ironic because he only transitioned to playing on the edge as a full-time pass rusher this year. But it's the rundown stuff, it's passing coverage and what you can do with him, that I think Jalon's experience playing on the second level, and I wouldn't play him there a ton, but if you want an edge player who can be in a two and can drop out and kind of just take away hot window throws or slants as a hook player, I think he can do that. And I think this whole defensive fad, not I don't want to say fad, but kick that the league is in right now with this Mike Macdonald scheme growing branches all over the league, it's I think a really attractive skill set for that.
Are you saying that Dion Jordan was just way ahead of his time?
He was, yeah. And nobody knows the Dion Jordan tragedy better than I and everybody with Dolphins fans or Dolphins apparel hanging on their walls. But maybe Dion Jordan just needed to get a time machine and come in 10 years later than what he did in the draft.
For those who don't remember, 2014 draft?
13.
And 13?
Yeah.
Yeah, number 3
overall. It was the Lane Johnson draft where they traded up, and you were for sure they were trading up for Lane Johnson, and they drafted Dion Jordan at number 3 instead.
He was so fascinating to me because teams were doing more of the, I mean, they played 3-4s back then. They dropped into coverage. He was 6'7". He was a cool coverage player for 6'7", but maybe not a good coverage player overall, not a great pass rusher. The Dolphins traded up to go get him, and he never really developed in addition to the off-field issues that he had. But just ahead of his time, man. He'd be great in the McDonald defense here. Abdul Carter, who you mentioned at 8, again, it's interesting because I think years ago when teams were playing a 3-4, they'd say, oh, they have 4 linebackers out there, until we smartened up and said, well, there's 2 pass rushers and there's 2 linebackers. Mm-hmm. And they're not the same position, right? And then Micah Parsons comes in and he was an actual linebacker who transitions to edge. That never happens. And now Abdul Carter's doing something similar for Penn State, and I think he's progressed in an incredible fashion, right? He kind of put the tools to work over the second half of this season. What have you seen from him as he's transitioned to edge this year for Penn State?
Yeah, after he got through the non-conference schedule and got into Big Ten play was when you really saw his production and consistency explode, rushing the passer and being aggressive and deconstructing blocks on the edge. I do have an expectation that there's going to be a little bit more of a developmental curve with the run defending stuff for him as a guy who's playing in that spot. But that's not why you're drafting a player like this. It's because of the tools and the explosiveness and the instincts and the length and the violence in which he can play with his hands. That's all very, very apparent. So I think maybe he's somebody who you get more long and late passing downs early in his career throughout his rookie season, but the sky's the limit as far as what he's capable of being, and you just understand there might be some growing pains there because he was a stack backer who blitzed a lot prior to this current year that we're in now.
Going up and down the draft board, again, over the 33team.com, loaded defensive line class. That seems to be the consensus among a lot of draft analysts. Do you agree as far as if you're in need for an edge, big-bodied nose tackle, penetrating 3-tech, whatever it might be, is this the draft class for you? How good is this defensive line class?
Yeah, I got almost a third of the top 100. It's 31 guys is defensive linemen of some variation, and that doesn't include a couple of guys in linebackers like Jalon Walker and even Jahad Campbell from Alabama who can do some of that same kind of stuff too. So all different kinds of flavors and body types and high floor run defenders and high ceiling pass rushers and, as you mentioned, space heaters in the middle. Penetration types like Derek Harmon from Oregon, who really had a nice year this year. I think he's a half step away in a lot of his reps from really exploding with the production to match the disruption profile that he has. But but yeah, for all the questions about some of the traditional premium spots in a draft class with offensive tackles and quarterbacks and even cornerbacks, I think once you get outside the top two, I mean, even Shavon Revel, who I'm over the moon for, is a guy coming off of a season-ending ACL injury and early in the season, only played in 3 games. This edge group, and you've seen interior defensive line become more of a premium position in the last couple of years.
Yep.
This is the spot where if you want to get bang for your buck, you want to feel like you're getting a premium player, you're going to have options.
All right, so we talked quarterbacks last time. Let's touch on the group at least a little bit here. Last year, we saw 6 quarterbacks go in the top 12. QB 6 in that class, Bo Nix, coming into his own as of recording time right now, looking really good these last few weeks. So by all accounts, it looks like a pretty good quarterback class from last year. Right now, though, you have no quarterbacks in your top 10. And as we talked about last time, it's like still moving parts, still a college football playoff to go here. Why no QBs in the top 10? And do you anticipate, anybody making a late move here?
Yeah, I think predictively you'll see, just based off the teams that need quarterbacks and them not wanting to miss the boat, I think you'll predictively see 2 go pretty early, probably in the top 10. I think it's Shader Sanders and Cam Ward are the 2 that have separated themselves. Everything else behind that looks really different than the last time we got together, where Carson Beck, it never clicked back into place. You were kind of hopeful that it would. You saw it in spurts, but never really a consistent week over week type thing. And because he doesn't have great tools that you don't want to hang your hat on, I'm fading him a little bit. Garrett Nussmeier, kind of same thing, where you were really impressed with the instincts that he had and not being a well-tenured starter. And he played well through the first half of the season. And then it kind of felt like once teams got more tape on him and they saw him a little bit more, they kind of knew some of the gunslinger tendencies that he continued to break out and had to learn some hard lessons. And it cost LSU a couple of football games. So I have Drew Aller and Jalen Milroe as QBs 3 and 4 right now. I think either one of those guys could make a declarative statement with like a postseason type of push if Alabama gets in, and Drew Aller obviously has a huge opportunity against Oregon for a guy who you've been waiting to just see against top competition, him take control and make a leap. He still misses way too often with what you would assume to be the easy stuff, the routine throws, but the physical profile that Drew Aller has, and I think he's made a lot of nice strides this year as far as growth, is the kind that doesn't come around very often. So that's kind of why those 2 guys from an athleticism and arm strength perspective have kind of separated themselves as a second tier.
Yeah, Mike Renner was on the show. I think he was the first one to put Aller in his top 5, was raving about the arm strength, the velocity. Dane Brugler, I think, has been the highest maybe on Jalen Milroe to this point. And I think the whole, and Rick Spielman, when he's on the show here, is just like, it changes every week. It changes every week. Let me know next week. We'll figure it out. So no one's, like, some guys are higher on some players versus others, but I think we're all in this boat of wait and see. Whereas last year, it was a pretty definitive, like, you feel good about Caleb Williams, eventually Jaden Daniels by the end of the season, and Drake May. Like, you feel pretty good about those top 3. It does feel like this whole thing is still a little wide open.
Yeah, I think for sure. And that's why I'm excited to get Aller and potentially Milroe in that kind of environment. I was really hoping we get to see Cam Ward, and I think Cam Ward would have been the one who had the most to gain from a playoff run. Obviously, they had a tough loss against Syracuse and blew a 21-point lead, and you kind of reap what you sow if you're the Miami Hurricanes. But he was the one who you're looking at the ACC schedule, and you acknowledge there's some questions, and that one is a bit of a bummer because I think he could have maybe created a little bit of separation from himself if he really had a dominant college football playoff run.
I wanted to see Shedeur in there too. I mean, both of those guys elevating their program, elevating their squad. Of course, Shedeur has your number 1 player, Travis Hunter, in there as well. But there was something to that. I definitely wanted to see both of those guys really in that top 12. I do want to talk a little bit about, let's finish with this real quick. Draft board wise, any other names that are notable that maybe you're higher on? I don't know how much you keep tabs on what other people are doing. Not so much to steal, but just to keep tabs on what people are doing. Are there any names that that you're just higher on than other people as far as your top 100 goes right now?
I tried to keep myself in the bubble as best as I can. I'll cross-reference for names to see if there's anybody that I need to go out of my way to watch that somebody's egregiously high on. But I've done final write-ups this week on Donovan Izaraku from Boston College and Kamari Ramsey, the safety from USC, who's just a redshirt sophomore. And both of those guys, I was really, really pleased with what I saw on tape of both of those guys. So for them to be top 20 players for me in this class, which is where they sit right now, Izaraku's obviously, as a senior, he'll be a part of the class, but Kamari Ramsey has a decision to make, and that's a lot of the same things we talk about with Malaki Starks. I think are applicable with Kamari Ramsey, with the exception being I don't think he's as good in man coverage, but he still has the questions as far as the ball production and how he makes plays on the back end. But you watch him diagnose quick hitting stuff and quick game in front of his face and trigger from depth with flat-footed reads and make tackles on rub routes and picks and stuff that's hitting on the perimeter that's designed to give a wide receiver a rub and get 4 yards for a first down, and he's making the tackle for a 2-yard gain and forcing a punt. And he probably did it like a dozen times this year. And it was like that kind of tackling on the edges for me really pops. So those are two guys that I'm not sure where consensus is, but I'd be surprised if consensus landed in the stratosphere that I have them.
Yeah, Izaraku was the guy that was like really like popping early, Florida State game early in the season, various games early in the season. And I could see it as a top 32 player in this draft. I could see it. I mean, he was a solid player last year and continued to be the best player on BC this entire season. So I like that. That's
him and Mike Green from Marshall probably have the two deepest pass rush bags of pass rushers as far as like variety of counters that they used, and I saw them win with consistency. So I think he's got first step quickness. I think the big question for him is like the speed to power conversion, but he has so many different counters that you feel really good about what the floor is as a pass rusher. And especially in this class, when you kind of have some questions at some other spots, if you feel like you're getting a good pass rusher, I'd expect them to be well represented.
I like that you mentioned Mike Green too. I see 55 on the big board right now. Just got first round hype from Dane Brugler. Mike Renner was the first guy I saw actually mention his name this offseason. Like, hey, watch this guy. And I like that. I mean, these players sometimes go from interesting prospect, keep an eye on him, to like, yeah, we legitimately have to start talking about them on day 1 or 2. And Mike Green's definitely been one of those guys from Marshall. So
yeah, he's had a dominant stretch, and he's really bendy too. I know the internet draft world loves burst and bend.
Yes.
Right. And that's Mike Green in spades for sure. So not surprised to hear, and would be very surprised to find out that there's not a bunch of people that are really a big fan of what he brings to the table too.
So I want to talk about the college football playoff, but before that, we have some championship games. So I'm going to Oregon, Penn State this weekend in Indianapolis. And so if you're listening after the fact, we're just going to talk prospects. Oregon, Penn State. We've seen Tyler Warren make a little Heisman push as a tight end / running back / left-handed quarterback, whatever you want him to be. He's in your top 20. Abdul Carter, who we already mentioned, several Oregon players. Derek Harmon, breakout player as a transfer, who you mentioned, disruptive pass rusher. What should I be looking for? Penn State, Oregon, and some of the top prospects on both teams.
So I have a total of 12 from these two teams combined in the top 100, and it's Abdul Carter, Tyler Warren, Kevin Winston, who's been injured this year at safety for Penn State, Nick Singleton, Drew Aller, and Danny Dennis Sutton, who's the other, I'll use air quotes here, other pass rusher for Penn State.
I call him the dentist, DDS. I call him the dentist.
And he's got some nice tools too. I think he'd probably get a little bit more buzz if he was the guy on that line. But of course, Penn State and the way that they manufacture athletes, particularly on defense, is right up there with the best of them. So he's a little bit of a sleeper. I got him in the 3rd round range with length and explosiveness. And then Oregon, Derek Harmon, Josh Connerly, and Anaji Cornelius. They're 2 offensive tackles. I think that's a great individual showcase with Abdul Carter and Danny Dennis Sutton. Jordan Birch and Jeffrey Bassa as a couple other front 7 players. And then Tez Johnson, who's a small, bursty, has a lot of quickness. They get him the ball in his hands very quickly in a lot of schemed ways. And then obviously Evan Stewart, who's not on the list, but was a 5-star at Texas A&M who transferred over. So there's opportunities regardless of who has the ball and whether you want to watch the front or the secondary to get guys that are popping and are going to be relevant for the next 4 months.
I definitely love that edge rusher matchup, Penn State versus the 2 Oregon tackles. I think both those tackles might need a little development time, strength, whatever it might be, but fantastic matchup. And the Oregon offensive line, I think they're up for the Joe Moore Award if I was listening to my friend Jeff Schwartz properly on the radio today, and they've come a long way, Oregon's offensive line this season. What do you make of Tyler Warren? Because he's been an outstanding college player. I don't know where you stand as far as his athleticism and the actual translation to the next level, but been a good run blocker. And, for those who haven't watched Penn State, they are using him all over the place. Direct snaps like crazy, had like 18 catches against USC in that game. They have turned him into, as a tight end, a Heisman contender, just in the ways that they've used Tyler Warren all over the field.
Yeah, I was not surprised to do his background bio because I did his write-up this week and find out that he was a multi-sport athlete that lettered 4 times in basketball, 3 times in baseball, and was a 3-star recruit in football. So you see that athleticism, and he had his senior year, he had more than 1,000 passing yards and 700 rushing yards as a guy who comes in and obviously is playing tight end. So all of that experience Penn State has been banking on to kind of maximize his versatility. I think he's got some room to grow. I think he's a solid, his functional strength is solid, but I think he still has room to grow as an inline player. I think right now he's probably better suited for an F than a true inline Y player at the tight end position, but he knows how to use his size to create separation at the top of the route. He's got really arrogant hands at the catch point. He's an accuracy eraser where if you're going to put it in his general vicinity, he's going to do a really good job of making sure that he's the first one to the football and attacks it in the air.
I like it.
He's somebody who I think as long as you're willing to be a little patient with the ancillary elements, and if you're drafting him early, it's to be an offensive weapon. I think he's got everything you need from an athleticism and receiving profile standpoint to do that at a high level.
All right, so that brings me to maybe a question off of that. Taysom Hill maybe finally came into his own this year. He'd shown flashes, but what's that?
Took him long enough, right?
I mean, he's
he's 35.
He's pushing 40 years old. But for the first time, I mean, he had other games in his career, but he was like a real impact player for the Saints before getting hurt. And then we have this narrative around the NFL. Running backs matter again. They're the most important player. Look what Saquon Barkley has done for the Eagles. Look what Derrick Henry has done for the Ravens, even though they've lost more games this year than last year. Look at what Josh Jacobs has done for the Packers. Do you think any of those NFL narratives are going to pop up in our little NFL draft community here over the next few months? So Ashton Genty is going to go save some franchise the same way Saquon Barkley saved the Eagles, or Tyler Warren is going to go, hey, be the next Taysom Hill because we just saw Taysom Hill do all sorts of stuff. Do you think any of the NFL narratives help some of these prospects here in this draft class?
I think more than that, I look at the way that the Detroit Lions have built their roster, and you reflect on a lot of the positional value debate that came out of the draft class that had Jack Campbell and Jahmyr Gibbs and Brian Branch and Sam Laporta as the first 4 picks in the class, I think.
Yep.
And those guys are just ballers. And every single one of them to some degree or another. And I know Laporta had the big rookie season production at tight end, and he's regressed a little bit this year for what he brings. But, I mean, Brian Branch has been one of the best defensive players in football. And Jahmyr Gibbs, while in a 50-50 effectively carry share with David Montgomery, is every bit as dominant of a player that you could have hoped that you were going to get with a top 20 pick. So I'd love to, especially in a class like this, where we talked about the dynamics of some of the premium positions. I'm really fascinated to see how they weigh out a player like a Tyler Warren who can be an impact player, or a Malaki Starks, or a Kamari Ramsey, or an Ashton Genty. These guys at non-premium positions, are you going to bet on the high ceiling traits at a premium position in lieu of what you feel like are more translatable players with ready-made NFL skill sets, or what you perceive to be ready-made NFL skill sets. I think that's the litmus test. I'll be really fascinated to see, do teams look at what Detroit did and say, hey, you know what? Especially in a class like this, maybe we just want to take the best players regardless of the positional value and stack our team that way.
And it's a year after you didn't have to make as many of those decisions. The positional value, it was all QBs, receivers, tackles, couple elite edge rushers. Like, it all matched up really well. Yeah. This year, other than D-line, it's kind of flipped a little bit. Loaded running back class, and you have some more of those questions from a positional value standpoint. I think that's going to be what's as fun as the QB discussions that we have every year. Where's everybody going to land? I just want to touch on the college football playoff real quickly, and then we'll have a email question and we'll get out. But you talked about Jalen Milroe. You know, if Bama gets into the playoff, if he can, make some noise. Drew Aller, if he can make some noise. I've described Ohio State as having 10 second-round picks on their team. It looks like you agree. It's pretty much all day 2 type players from Ohio State's roster. Can any of those guys move up into the first round? Any players, teams, like, where do you think some noise can be made as far as the draft goes in the college football playoff besides, what we've already discussed?
Yeah, I think Ohio State's a good place to start. And the top-ranked player that I have is a guy who's not going to play because it's Josh Simmons, the tackle who really came on this year after transferring in and unfortunately had his own season-ending injury. There's a couple of guys that are like that are in this class, and the talent is obvious. He could have been a big riser out of this group. But I look at kind of the guys that I do have down for Ohio State, and Jack Sawyer's got a really good pass rush profile, but the consistency of production versus being just around the quarterback, it's a ceiling versus floor debate where I think maybe he's one in a really crowded class that if he comes out and plays well and isn't just fired up about whether or not somebody put a flag at the 50-yard line, maybe that helps him in a really crowded group. That's a name that definitely comes to mind for me.
Hold on, did you see the guys at the Ringer breaking down his interception and Gus Johnson's losing his voice?
I did not, but the Gus Johnson commentary on that play was probably the highlight of my year, to listen to him react to that play as it happened.
I am so sad I missed it. I was like doing all sorts of Christmas tree stuff and setting things up, and I had the YouTube 4 box going, and I don't think I had the audio on at the right time. I missed it. He completely lost his voice. Jack Sawyer intercepted. It was unbelievable. That would have been such a legendary play if they could have. Anyway, that's like Jack. Yeah, you're right, Jack Sawyer, because he was right in the middle of the plant the flag gate last week or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, he's a good solid player who's going to get a million Sam Hubbard comps, I'm sure, this draft season.
Would not surprise me one bit. I would also mention Alfred Collins, defensive tackle from Texas. Again, you think about the dynamics of this class and how it's a crowded room, and he's a bigger bodied guy, and the archetype that he's probably going to get bucketed with is guys like Kenneth Grant and maybe Jalon Walker from Kentucky as just big bodied guys that maybe have a little bit more twitch than what you would expect. But if he can really piece it together, I know they got a really good freshman player there on that defensive line that everybody's really excited for. But Alfred Collins from Texas, even coming up with this weekend with the rematch against Georgia in the SEC championship game, I think he's somebody that can maybe make some more headway for himself as well.
Love it. It's a whole new world in college football where we've got so much football still yet to be played. And yeah, look, Michael Penix Jr., I think played himself into the first round just because of the Texas game last year. I thought the Michigan game, the national championship, would hurt him. Didn't hurt him in the Falcons' eyes, obviously, but we know how much these postseason games can actually matter as far as draft stock goes. The one Twitter question I wanted to highlight here, John Owning from now at PFF, former colleague. Princely Umanmielen. Why is he slept on? Why is he ranked behind edges that he's clearly better than, Kyle? Where do you have Princely?
I got Princely 25th overall.
Why do you hate him? Why does everybody hate him?
That's my favorite question. Is it could be you could have somebody 12th and have somebody ask you, why do you hate this player? But Princely's got a great first step. And I think his pressure rate over the last 2 seasons, it's one of 4 that I had in my top 10 edges that was over 19% of pass rush attempts, which it's a really healthy number. I think he's a little bit more angular. So I think if you're going into the questions, it's probably the ability to anchor play the point of attack in the run game with consistency. He's got a really good first step and inside shoulder reduction to turn the corner and flatten. I think he does that on par with the best guys in this class. But if I were to start poking holes or asking questions, it would be, if you're going to put a tight end over top of him and play him on 2nd and 3 or 3rd and 1, and he's got to play the point of attack, how well does he do that? I think that's still a little bit of a work in progress for him. But the pass rush profile, I mean, even a couple of the guys that I have in front of him with Nick Scorton from Texas A&M and Michael Williams from Georgia, I think Princely's authentically a better pass rusher than both of those guys. It's just a matter of putting the full 3-down profile together, I think.
That reminds me of the Brian Burns profile just a little bit, right? Not necessarily a designated pass rusher, but a clear distinction in skill set where I trust this guy getting after the QB, disrupting, but I don't know. I mean, even Chop Robinson, maybe similar, right? No, this guy's going to go out there, rush the passer, but you don't trust him on early downs nearly as much.
That's the right kind of player to invoke. And I put James Pierce in this year's class in that same conversation too. I think Pierce is a little bit more fluid and loose and slippery, and that's why he's rated for me above Princely. But it's that same kind of archetype that you told me this upcoming season he played 550, 600 snaps, and most of them were on 3rd and 6 plus, and then you smattered in some 1st and 10s and against 11 personnel. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Well, Kyle, I appreciate it. As always, love talking draft. We got championship weekend. We have the college football playoff, all sorts of great college football still to go. The entire big board, it's over at the30third-team.com. You got a top 100 up right now. What else do you have going on, and where else can everybody find all the work you're doing in the various places?
Yeah, so excited to be putting player profiles together for the 33rd team. We're working our way through that process right now, and going to start turning our eyes towards a lot of the all-star event players and take advantage of, as those guys are announced as being participants, we're going to get final write-ups on them put together. I got a mock draft coming up on Monday for the 33rd team. I do daily NFL team building with Joe Marino over at Locked On NFL Scouting. And then I also do Locked On Dolphins for any Dolphins fans that are interested in a team-specific focus 5 days a week as well.
Now, Kyle, one of the first times we met was down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and you were trying a little eating challenge. I don't remember the exact challenge. I believe you failed and were miserable for the next day and a half. Are you training? Are you going back to the well? Have you ever conquered? And what was it? It was a burger and fries?
Yeah, it was Saucy Q's.
Yeah.
Was the barbecue place, and it was by the old stadium where they used to have it.
That's
and
right.
It was the Big Pig Challenge, which was 2.5 pounds of pulled pork, a pound of slaw, and a pound of barbecue sauce on 8 hamburger buns. I thought it was going to come on like one big bun, and it was just like a full package of hamburger buns that they laid all the bottoms out and threw all this stuff on top of. Needless to say, I will not be trying the challenge again. And I don't know. I haven't really told this story a ton, but if you've ever gone to Saucy Q's, the bathroom when you're done, because they pull out a table, they make you set up like right by the door where the line is to go in.
Yeah.
So we're between practices and I'm sitting at this table like an idiot with like the bib on, and I'm picking away at this thing. And the line is from the front door or from the ordering booth out the front door of media, NFL coaches, NFL executives, so on and so forth. And right across from on the other side of the room was the bathroom. If you go in the bathroom, there's no door on the stall in there. So when you're done, I locked eyes with an NFL general manager after attempting the challenge with the aftermath of what happened at Saucy Q. So I would highly recommend nobody try the Saucy Q challenge, because I probably had the worst case scenario that could have played out with that entire experience.
I had to bring it up because what the situation you described, right, at the old stadium, they used to give you an hour and a half or whatever between practice. And everybody would go. There's 1,000 media members. There's the whole NFL, every scout, everybody. They all go to Saucy Q's in between. Like you described it perfectly. The line, and you were just sitting there and everybody's walking by, laughing at you, high-fiving you, kind of whatever it was. And you looked miserable about halfway through it. So I'm just glad we could get that all out here on Check the Mic.
We have full transparency here. So don't try it. I wouldn't recommend it.
Well, appreciate the full transparency, Kyle. Everybody go check it out. Go check out all Kyle's great work and, of course, the big board over at the33team.com. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. See you again next time with a little draft discussion.